Hey guys! So I just wanted to make a kind of a reminiscent video. I'm totally stealing this idea from Sarah over at the Library of Sarah. If you want to go check out her channel, she is adorable and I have followed her book videos for years at this point. But she just made this really good and kind of, for me it was inspirational, but it was a very nostalgic video of bookish memories in that yes, we remember the stories that we read, but I feel like there's a lot of books that stick with you just because of the context that you read it in, like wherever you happened to be when you were reading the book, or just things that were happening in your life at that point in time that you can picture yourself like in that exact moment reading that book. And I just kind of wanted to discuss some of mine. A lot of these are going to be older books because obviously a lot of my bookish memories are from when I was younger and like discovering certain books and everything. So I'm just going to hop into it. I'm going to kind of go all over the place. I'm not necessarily going to start when I was youngest and move chronologically, but just as memories come to me, I'm going to kind of talk about them. Now, as soon as I saw her video and decided that I wanted to do it, the very first book that came to mind was The Black Stallion by Walter Farley. This is one of the most vivid reading experiences I think I've like ever had as a kid, mainly because I read this book to death. I mean, you can tell how like well loved this book is. This is one of my favorite books from when I was a kid. But I vividly remember my parents sending me to bed, and I had a ridiculously early bedtime when I was younger. Like, we had to go to bed at like 7:30 or something like that. And during the summertime, the sun is still up at 7:30. You can still hear kids out playing. And I remember being so unbelievably angry at my parents for sending me to bed and that I wasn't allowed to stay up and read, that I was like, it's still light out. And I literally remember sitting in my bed next to my window just reading this, and my mom coming in and being like, really? But this book is like one of the very first things that got me into horses. So this also holds a lot of sentimental value for me. Next, I want to talk about a series that means a lot to me. And this is the first series that I remember binge reading as like a young, I think I was probably 10 or 11 when I discovered this series. And outside of like Harry Potter or like Pony Pals or chapter books as kids and everything, this is the first series that I remember begging to go to the bookstore and buying in bulk. Like, I bought like the next 4 books in a row. And that is the Sweep series by Kate Tiernan. This is a book about magic and Wicca and teenagers, and it was just so eye-opening as like young adult books were for me. I don't know, I remember just lying in the top bunk of my bunk bed, because every 90s kid had a bunk bed, and just reading for hours all the way through this. I probably read this entire series in about 2 weeks, and for like a 12-year-old, that's a lot of reading. I love these books. They're so good. Now, this next trilogy that I want to talk about, they're fantastic books to begin with, but again, they kind of hold more sentimental value for me rather than like narrative value, regardless of how great the book is, because the stories are great. But that is the Midnighters trilogy by Scott Westerfeld. I believe this is his first series. I might be wrong about that, but it's way before he got really big. But I remember reading these specifically for a teen book group that was at my Barnes & Noble that my mom ran because she worked there, and we kind of co-hosted because I kind of wanted to feel important, and she let me, this teen book group. And it was the first time that I made friends outside of school and outside of like my horseback riding lessons. It was the first time that I actually made friends like on my own in public. And I remember every time that we would have a group meeting, we would discuss the book for an hour, just kind of talk about books and stuff for a long time. And then the last like 15 minutes, we would walk to the YA section and as a group pick out the next books. And I remember all of us picking these books out to read like consecutively, like 3 months in a row. But I very vividly remember sitting up in the one nook area where all of the chairs are in Barnes & Noble and just talking about these books for hours with these girls after the meetings were over. It was just a really eye-opening experience as a young teen to kind of branch out and make friends on your own without the influence of school or jobs or anything. So it was just a really cool time in my life. The next book I want to talk about is kind of a darker read for me, and it was one of the first books that I remember kind of experiencing the shock of, like, real life through a book. And it was completely at random, but that book is Impulse by Ellen Hopkins. I had seen Crank and Glass on the bookshelves for a long time, and I knew about her books, but I never picked them up. And I honestly didn't even know that this was by that same author. I just happened to find this as an ARC because I worked at Barnes & Noble and we get ARCs sent to a lot of the bookstores consistently. And this just happened to be sitting on the break room table and I just kind of grabbed it. I didn't really read the back. I remember lying in my bed and reading this, and if you know anything about Ellen Hopkins, her books generally don't end on a happy note. And this was the first book that I remember reaching the end, and it just, like, it hits you in the face with reality. Like, stories don't end happy. That means books don't always have to end happy either. And it was just the very first time that I was like, whoa, that was real talk right there. But I was probably about 16 when I read this, and it was the first book that I had ever hit that didn't have a happy ending. And that's not a spoiler or anything. All of her books are pretty harsh as far as content goes. They're pretty blunt and realistic, but it was very eye-opening for me. The next book that I want to talk about, I don't own a copy of it, but it's called, I don't even know who it's by, but it's called The Sign of the Beaver, and I remember reading it in 5th grade, I believe, and it was in that phase of elementary school reading when, I don't know if your school had this, but we had popcorn reading. And as a very, very shy, quiet book nerd kid, the idea of popcorn reading was terrifying to me. If you don't know what popcorn reading is, it's pretty much where you bounce around the room and you each read either like a paragraph or a page or a like amount of a book, and then you say popcorn, somebody's name, and it just jumps to the next person. You have to read everything out loud. As a very, very quiet kid, that was terrifying to me. And The Sign of the Beaver was one of the first times that we really ever did that as a class, and I remember being so anxious about it, but at the same time, as I was reading and everything, it kind of broke me out of my shell a little bit, and I don't remember much of the book, to be honest, but I know it had a lot to do with Native Americans and kids that were our age at that time, so it was kind of relatable for a 5th grade class, but it was a very interesting time of being A, terrified of reading out loud in front of my class, and B, overcoming that fear and kind of growing up. It was kind of my own personal coming-of-age tale when we read The Sign of the Beaver in my 5th grade class. Now, this wouldn't be a Bookish Memories video if I didn't include Harry Potter. Everything about those books is vivid, and I feel like pretty much anybody who grew up with those books will say the same thing. I personally grew up with Harry. I was essentially the same age as them as the books came out, so that was obviously very relatable for me. But I remember going to the midnight release parties with all of my friends and just how exciting it was, and it was one of the few times in a store, in public, that everybody there is for the exact same thing, and everybody is exactly as excited as you are. And I remember counting down till midnight. Everybody's in full costume, everybody has lightning bolts and the glasses, and I just remember the excitement that built around those books, and I feel like that's a huge part of the story for me, is how we grow as a culture with those books, because everybody grew up with Harry. Everybody can look back at memories with Harry. As crazy as that sounds, I know it's just a book, but I feel like the Harry Potter trio is like everybody's kind of imaginary friends when you look back at it, because you grew up with them. You spent years and years with them. And everything about the Harry Potter books is just good feels. It's good memories. Everybody has Harry Potter memories, and they're just great books. And in that same vein, I feel like I also can't really go through this video without bringing up the Twilight phenomenon, because yes, I was a part of that. I was young when those came out. They were new and exciting, and they got everybody reading, and I feel like that was the big appeal. As I was kind of an older teen when the last ones came out, I mainly was more impressed with how much it got people to read. And I know everyone has made videos about this, everybody's talked about this, but the Twilight generation really brought YA to where it is now. Whether you feel positively or negatively about it, they were books that made people read. It got people to branch out and read YA when YA wasn't really existent at that time. So my own personal memories with that are, we actually had Stephenie Meyer sign at my bookstore when I worked there, so I got to meet her. I have signed copies of the books, and I believe it was for the release of Eclipse, which was right before it hit the peak of like the excitement for Twilight. So that's why we obviously got her at my small town Barnes & Noble. But I remember how cool it was, and I have a picture, I'll see if I can find it, of me standing in my break room with Stephenie Meyer, just smiling for the camera. That right there was Twilight for me, being like 15 or 16 and being in the midst of the hype. That it belongs in this video. That's a bookish memory. One more actual book memory, and then I have a few others to talk about. The only other book that like is a pinnacle in my mind as far as reading and memories in childhood is my mom used to read The Polar Express to me and my brother every Christmas Eve, and I remember always either sitting in one of our bedrooms with all the candles lit or around the Christmas tree every Christmas Eve night and reading that before we go to bed. And I feel like the hype of Christmas Eve is what added to that story because you're so excited. Obviously, you're not going to sleep for hours, but that was her way of getting us together and calming us down. And we did it probably from as before I can remember up until we were teenagers, I think. And even then, I still dig out that book and read it every Christmas Eve. I feel like it's a very good family tradition that I like to continue, whether I'm with my parents or not. But that one holds a special place in my heart. And the next thing I want to talk about is the generation of audiobooks, because as I was thinking of bookish memories, I started to lose track of actual books that I remember sitting down and holding and reading, but that's kind of been replaced with audiobooks, which I kind of have mixed feelings about, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I listen to a ton of audiobooks, and I used to work at a job where I could have headphones in all day, every day, so I would just fly through books. So a lot of books take me back to that job and what I was doing at that point in time when I was listening to that book. But there are a few key moments. One, I was listening to The Strain by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan. I was at work and it was kind of a factory job, but I had my headphones in, I was doing my job. This is a terrifying book. It's very creepy, it's very like suspenseful. And I remember my supervisor walking up just to say something to me, but tapping me on the shoulder and me just screaming bloody murder because I was in a really, really tense part of this book while I was listening to it, and I was so into it that it just scared the bejesus out of me when she walked up. So this book will forever be a really funny memory between me and that supervisor. Also, I was listening to Pure by Juliana Baggett this past summer, and this past summer was the very first summer that I owned my horses, and I had them boarded at a friend's house, and I just remember sitting in the field and listening to it and just staring at them. And that was one of those like epiphany moments where I was like, you know what? I'm where I want to be in life. And I just remember sitting in the dirt, leaning against a fence post, just watching them graze and listening to this book. So this book will forever hold that like, I'm an adult and I achieved things that I wanted moment for me. So yeah, needless to say, books hold a lot of sentimental value in our lives. There was a lot in books and in the act of reading books and the moment in your life that you had when you were reading them. It's just, they hold a lot of impact more than the story that they tell you. I feel like they kind of tell your own story with where you are in your life. If any of you have really good bookish memories, feel free to share them. I would love to watch more videos of this. I would love this to get popular. That's gonna be it for me this video. I will see you guys soon. Don't worry, I have book hauls coming because I know that's what everybody wants to see, so stay tuned. I have some book outlet hauls coming and some book hauls and all that good stuff. So I will see you guys very soon. Bye.